By 2030, this might be as big as the EV industry, if not more. That's a huge number that nobody's taking into account.
$1 trillion market cap for Tesla over the next year, despite many of the haters continuing to hate.
And when you think about Tesla, I know you think about electric vehicles, but this is way bigger than electric vehicles.
100 million miles a day they're getting for data, and then they're also getting compute that they're going to have more compute than anyone in the world in 18 months.
Now look, we have a lot of Tesla haters in this world, a lot of skeptics, a lot of doubters. The people who doubted Tesla, who bet against Elon, a lot of people shorted this stock. In fact, this was one of the most shorted stocks of the past 5 years. Tesla shorts have lost a lot of money betting against this company, betting against Elon. This stock did 1,000% of the past 5 years. It did 130% over the past year. It made me a lot of money as one of my bigger positions in my portfolio. With the exception of Palantir, this is my second biggest position of an individual stock. Now, this is a company that's currently trading at $800 billion of market cap. And I know it's weird to talk about an $800 billion company and say, well, this is a huge opportunity to get in early. But look at what I'm saying here. This is a $10 trillion company by 2030, in my opinion, which means it's going to more than 10x within the next 7 years. Now, if I'm right, this is going to be another huge home run for me. If I'm wrong and Tesla only grows 10 to 15% a year, so be it. It's still going to make a lot of money. Because you see, the beauty of this company is not just the fact that it has an enormous amount of ceiling. In fact, I would say it's almost unlimited. It can easily do $10 trillion and maybe more by 2030. But the floor is very, very hard. It's going to be hard for Tesla not to grow just slightly, even if they do nothing but sell EVs for the next 7 years. So for me, when I'm analyzing this company and I'm seeing almost an unlimited amount of upside and very low risk, this is a very attractive candidate for me, and I think it's worth your time to research it a little bit more. Obviously, I'm not telling you to buy it or sell it. It's not financial advice. Do your own research. But here's where I'm at mentally in my headspace. Now, since the bread and butter of this company is electric vehicles as of 2023, this has to be our starting point, and only then we're going to branch out to the other more exciting stuff it has for 2030. Now, for that, we have to look at what the market will look like by 2030. So it means a lot of assumptions, but we have some research papers that actually give us a little bit of insight of how much electric vehicles we're going to see sold by 2030. So right now we have 85 million vehicles sold annually around the world. That number is expected to go to 100 million. And if you look at the research papers about how many of these vehicles will be electric by 2030, well, that numbers range between 30% according to S&P Global and 60 to 80% according to RMI. And that means we're talking about a market of 30 to 70 million EVs every year globally. That's a massive market, way bigger than we have right now. And don't forget, this market, the EV market, isn't growing linearly. It's growing exponentially. So those numbers may look insane in 2023, but by the time we hit 2030, 30 to 70 million electric vehicles every year sounds completely normal to me, looking at the current rate of growth.
Tesla right now is doing about 1.8 million cars a year. When we started investing in the company 7 years ago, when we invested between 2014 and 2016, they were doing 41,000 cars a year. So 41,000 cars a year to 1.8 million, they're on their way to 20 million cars.
Currently, Tesla sells about 17% of the entire global EV market. It's pretty much tied neck and neck with BYD, which is something I predicted about 2 years ago. I said BYD is going to be number 2. They're currently neck and neck. It's not really important which one of them will take 1 and 2, but both of these companies will dominate the global EV industry. It's pretty clear. Now, in the United States, North America, Tesla dominates completely. There's no BYD here. About 50% of the sales in North America is Tesla. Rest of the world is going to be half and half. China is going to be dominated by BYD. And that means that Tesla by 2030 sells 10 to 20 million vehicles. And a lot of you are going to jump up and say, well, Tom, how will they even make 10 to 20 million vehicles in 7 years? They're building factories all the time. Tesla is really good at ramping up. So I wouldn't be worried about their capacity. It's all about creating market, which is currently what they're doing. Now, look, if they sell 10 to 20 million vehicles a year by 2030 at about $45,000 per vehicle, we're talking to anywhere from $500 billion to $1 trillion of revenue by 2030 just from the EV industry. That's a huge number that nobody's taking into account. Now, what about full self-driving? Now, full self-driving is massive. Well, let's talk about the full self-driving just on the Tesla side. Based on Tesla's current sales, based on 2030 sales, and based on the FSD penetration, assuming 30% of Tesla clients in 2030 buy FSD at about $12,000 a pop, we're talking about another $70 to $80 billion of revenues just from FSD to Tesla clients. What about FSD globally, the licensing? Nobody else has anything close to FSD, so the rest of the OEMs, the auto industry, will have to license this thing from Tesla. But let's say they only penetrate 30%. Let's say 70% of the market says, we don't need FSD. Fine. 30% of the market leases at $5,000, not at $12,000 from Tesla, licenses FSD. That's another $150 to $200 billion of revenue. And we're not even there at energy, which is going to be another $4 to $8 billion by 2030, maybe even more. We haven't even said a word about robotics. Trust me, robotics is the thing that nobody understands fully, not even myself. This is the biggest sleeper, the biggest joker in Tesla's toolbox, because this thing might be the biggest business they have. It's just very hard to quantify right now. Think about it this way. The biggest problem with Western societies is the fact that they have an aging population. There's not enough workforce to fill all these spots. This is a huge solution. We're talking about machinery. We're talking about production lines. We're talking about undesired jobs. We're talking about so much potential in this thing. And think about the licensing. Think about the sales. It's going to be massive. By 2030, this might be as big as the EV industry, if not more. So we're talking about a company that's going to generate anywhere from $1 to $1.5 trillion of revenues in 2030. Based on the current price to sales that we understand from the market, which will grow by 2030, we're talking about Apple at 8, Nvidia at 27, and Microsoft at 12, Meta at 7. Applying these numbers, 8 to 10 price to sales based on these assumptions by 2030, easily gives us a $10 trillion. Now, there's no guarantees in life. Nobody says it's a certainty. There's nothing certain in life except death and taxes, and yes, Tesla. And obviously, this is what investing is all about. You take calculated risks. When I look at this and I see the massive amount of potential and I see the amount of risk, it's a very appealing option for me to allocate capital to. Whether it goes south or explodes to the moon, I don't know. Neither do you, neither does anybody on TV. But we have to take calculated risks and look at massive amounts of potential. I think this is the biggest potential pocket right now in the stock market. But of course, some of you may agree, some may disagree. Let me know in the comment section below if you agree or disagree. And of course, shout out to Michigan, go blue. We just beat Alabama. We'll see Washington in the finals. Peace.